Hi, so the plan of the day is Natan speaking, then I'm going to give a bit of a lecture building on some of the ideas he's been talking about identity and the power of land and the power of the journey of Indigenous people. And then we'll come up together for a conversation and happy to take questions. So a few years ago when Natan and I were writing a book together, I talked about some of the issues that were going on in Canada at McGill, and which is much more of a conversation about First Nations and land acknowledgements. And Natan goes, "What's a land acknowledgement?" And I start explaining, and then he gets that light in his eyes, and he says, "Oh, I get it. So when we stand here in Jerusalem, what we should always do is say, we are standing on the land of Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac and Rebekah, of Jacob, and all our forefathers and foremothers, and that's a land acknowledgement too." And what's so interesting is the degree to which it's all become politicized, right, which is what Natan was talking about. That they're trying to not just, I don't call this just a negation of our right to exist, which is bad enough, but it's historicide. If suicide means killing yourself, if homicide means killing someone else, historicide is someone trying to kill my history. Someone trying to say, look, you want to disagree with Israel? Fine. You don't like what we do? Fine. You want to say two different peoples have conflicting rights to the same land? We who grew up in the shadow of Manhattan know that that's talking about the questions of the $24 for which the Dutch paid for Manhattan. There are conflicts in history. There are tensions in history. There are disagreements in history. But the systematic campaign to steal our story, to kill our story, to deny our roots is what's so toxic. That's our first warning today. The second warning is that it works on us and it makes us defensive. And as a result, too much of the conversation about our indigenous rights to the land is about, no, but look, we really do belong here. Look at this Babylon's Museum. Look at all the ways we can prove it. That's playing on their turf, folks. That's playing by their terms. That's apologizing. And if there's one thing we learned from Zionism, there's one thing we learned from the Soviet Jewish movement, it's the Jiu-Jitsu, J-E-W. Take the negative and turn it into a positive. Don't let them define us. And so today I want to talk about the notion of the promised land. And I want to talk about, again, building on all the themes that Natan was talking about, that you start with land, you start with indigeneity, but then it is about identity. And it's about a flow of creativity that comes from connecting to your land, from connecting to your people, from connecting to your rituals, from connecting to your language. And being one of, as Erwin Kotler, the human rights activist who fought to free Natan, says, the Jews are one of the original Aboriginal people. We're still standing on the same land, still praying from the same Siddurim, the same prayer books, using the same language. And that's the challenge. But first, unfortunately, we have to do a bit of an exorcism and look at this word, settler colonialism, which was just not a very popular word. And all of a sudden, boom, it's a hot word. Now, I've shared this with Wayne because there are lots and lots of words here. We're not going to get through all the words, and so I'll be very happy to, through Wayne, have this presentation shared. So I thought, let's just take 3 minutes, because the word is bandied about so much, and ask the question, what is this term, settler colonialism? And what's very interesting is that there's in the Journal of Imperial and Commonwealth History from 2013, there's a paper looking at the phrase settler colonialism. And what do we discover? And what's interesting is, we're academics, so I have to show what he says and then disagree a little bit. So he says, first, think about it, when I grew up, and it was Thanksgiving in America, we talked about the pilgrims, we also talked about the settlers coming to the land, right? And when we talked in Israel about the settlers wasn't a political concept. It was a concept of the chalutzim, the pioneers, the people who brought green to the land, who brought joy to the land, who brought creativity to the land. So first, until the 1960s, settlement colonialism, colonization are separate from colonialism. Colonialism is the act of the British going to India, going to the United States, going far away, going to Australia, New Zealand, right? But colonization, settlement were good things. Not only that, at a certain point in the second stage, settler colonialism becomes a problem at a term because it's considered to be the die-hard colonialism that comes in extract. And we'll get to that in a second. But notice during the third phase, settler colonialism, sorry, it's cut off, was the capacity to bring life to the land. Even in the 1970s, settler colonialism was a positive idea. Now, what's missing from this analysis is, of course, the 1960s and the anti-colonial movement. And people like Frantz Fanon, a psychiatrist, who's talking about the power of colonialism as a system and linking colonialism, colonization, settlement, and racism. And in the 1960s, that's the most toxic of brews. And it's going to be turned against your enemies, turned against the West, turned against the United States of America, and of course, turned against Israel, the Jews, Zionism. And it's funny because if you see in this, he says, we haven't sufficiently demonstrated that colonialism is not satisfied merely with holding the people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. By kind of perverted logic, it turns to the past of the oppressed people and distorts, defigures, and destroys it. Historicide. They're doing that to us now. People who were victimized by it, who came out of it, are now weaponizing that same process. And Albert Memmi writes a book. He's born in Tunisia, ends up in France. And he also talks about the power of the colonizer, the colonized, that's the fundamental dynamic, the fundamental relationship that's going on. And look, it's significant. Racism is part of colonialism throughout the world. And it's no coincidence. Racism sums up and symbolizes the fundamental relationship which unites colonialists and colonized. So even as this lovely academic was talking about the way colonizing and settlement might be seen as a positive way in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the toxicity of today, where the great crime is racism, of course, racism is horrific. But weaponizing racism and using it broadly to mean anything bad is also horrific because it takes away the ugliness of racism. It means simply those with whom I disagree or those whom I don't like, as opposed to biologically based discrimination. And then, of course, the academics catch up, and by 1999, this Patrick Wolf's book on settler colonialism is considered to be the book that brings it into the academic world, and then we're really in trouble. Settler invasion is a structure, not an event. It rests on the logic of elimination. What are they saying? They're saying that it's a whole worldview. And so if I can say the West is settler colonialist, the United States is settler colonialist, Zionism is settler colonialism, I can negate the whole thing. One-stop shopping. I know we have distinguished academics in the room. It's the complete anathema to academia. Academics are about complexity, subtlety, nuance. And this is all about totalizing, essentializing. And it becomes winner-take-all, a zero-sum game. And then in 2005, there's a book, a collection on post-colonial states and metropolitan societies. And lo and behold, Israel ranks with South Africa and Korea, the Japanese in Korea, Manchuria. Now we're with the bad guys. And then you can see the references grow and grow. But life is more complicated. Our friend Albert Memmi, who talked about colonizer and colonizing, is himself a Jew. And he writes about the problematics about being a Jew in this colonial system, because you're both oppressed as just one of the colonized, one of the dark people, one of those on the wrong end of racism, but also as a Tunisian, as a Jew. And he goes on his own complicated path about coming back to the land and coming back to Zionism. And again, I packed this so that we could share it with you. Today, we are no longer defending a myth, the myth of return to Zion, in the second part, but a myth come true, the most solid of realities. We live in this new Jewish nation, and now we have the opportunities. And he says, When you're colonized, you're shadowy. You've lost who you are. Only a national solution, coming back to the land, coming back to your culture, coming back to your history, coming back to yourself, can solve that problem, can fight colonialism. And so it was a fight on he looks in the second paragraph, there's a fight against a twofold form of misery. We had to fight against the oppressor from the outside, but also we needed a revolution within. Zev Jabotinsky from the right, David Ben-Gurion from the left, two strong Zionists who disagreed on almost everything, agreed that Zionism had to be a double revolution. A revolution not only against the Ottomans and then the British who were holding our land to dislodge them, but worse, most important of all, most challenging, to expel, to exorcise the Jew within, the broken down Jew, the beaten up Jew, the apologetic Jew, which is exactly the process that Natan went through in 1967 when he discovered all of a sudden that his friends looked at him after the 1967 war and looked at him as this Jew and this powerful Jew. Now, of course, if we had more time, we talk about Zionism, we talk about Zionism as a thrice-born idea. I'm going to trust that others have talked about the power of the Jewish homeland and how central land is in the Jewish story, in the DNA, in Tanakh. And then in the 19th century, in the mid-1800s, when there's nationalism, there's Italian nationalism, and American nationalism, and British nationalism, and nationalism isn't considered to be a dirty word, Jews also say, hey, what about our form of nationalism? Peoplehood. And then, of course, in 1897, the formal launch of the Zionist movement with Theodor Herzl and the push for Jewish statehood. And what's Theodor Herzl's process? One, understanding that we are a people, one people. Two, understanding, and again, I'm trying to emphasize identity and creativity, not apologetics, and not even our rights to the land. That Zionism is a return to Jewishness, even before we get to the land. It's an internal process as well as a political process. And what's the power of the land and the state and the people? Not just me, not just my, but to use it as a platform to make the world a better place. The power of, after thousands of years of homelessness, that we will be able to ultimately come back and live and be free people on our own soil and die peacefully in our own homeland is amazing. But the world will be freed by our freedom, enriched by our riches, made greater by our greatness. And whatever we attempt there for our own welfare will spread for the rest of humanity. That's the power of what Natan always calls identity and freedom. That's the power of this duality, and that's the volatility you find when you read the Torah, when you read the Bible. Constructive volatility. It's not just about us defending ourselves. It's not just about telling our story, but it's about witnessing to the world something really special. And again, we have to talk about the fact that, yes, there was a challenge with Uganda. What happens in the 6th World Zionist Congress? Look at the dates. Anybody know what year the 6th World Zionist Congress was? 1903, what geniuses. What happens in 1903? Kishinev pogrom. 43 holy souls are killed. Think about it. When 43 people are killed in a pogrom in 1903, that makes headlines all over the world. In a pogrom, I'm talking about the pogrom in Kishinev. Look how insensitive we've become. How used we are to levels of Jewish suffering in the thousands, in the millions. 43 dead people in Kishinev led Theodore Roosevelt to respond, led world leaders to respond, and sent Theodor Herzl into a panic. Getting back to our land, Palestine, will take too long. If there's a chance of a compromise, a chance of a temporary solution in the Kenyan highlands, why not go for it? But when he sees the anger against it, he ultimately gets up, and even though he was very awkward in Hebrew, he says, L'shana B'ha b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And he admits, because he's in a process like we're all in a process. People love to go through Herzl's diaries, or Ben Gurion's speech and say, you see, this speech that he gave shows this. That's not history. That's not complexity. That's prosecution. He said, I started out as only a Jewish statist. I didn't fully get it. But now I understand there's no other solution but Palestine for the great national question, which is called the Jewish question, the Judenfrage, because it is our home. It is our launching pad. It is our source. It is our lifeblood. It is our soul. Peres Smolenskin, who, because it's important for us to remember that Zionism doesn't just start with Herzl. So in the 1880s, he talks about the Maskilim, the enlightened ones of Berlin. He can smell their cowardice, their fear, their desire to be accepted. What was the keystone of the Haskalah of Berlin, these enlightened people? Yes, we can get out of the ghetto as long as they accept us. So it's to imitate the Gentiles, to abandon our traditions, to disdain our own manners. So what do? Ultimately, we have to understand that we must come home. And look at his powerful last line. Only a dog neither has nor wants a home. Someone who chooses to live your whole life as a transient without a thought for the establishment of a permanent home will always be regarded as a dog. We will not have our own dignity, and no one will respect us until we return to our land, to our roots, to our story, to who we are. Smolenskin was part of the rebellion against religion. Rav Kook was deeply within the religious tradition. And the texts are remarkable because he talks about the organic power of returning to the land, the mystical power of the land, the godly dimensions to the land, and the fact that that is what makes us whole. And look, Jewish, in the third paragraph, Jewish original creativity, whether in the realm of ideas or in the area or in the arena of daily life and action, is impossible except in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. The land of Israel is what gives us our fuel, what gives us our context. And frankly, for all those who say, the Jews were so ethical until they came back to the land, it's really easy to be ethical when you have no power. To learn how to wield power and still be ethical, and still do what we can to minimize the suffering on the other side when we're attacked. To still try to be the most moral army in the world. That's true ethics. Those are true values. That's what the Bible is all about. Amen. And A.D. Gordon, even more extreme than Peres Smolenskin in his rebellion against religion, ends up on kibbutz. As secular as they come. But what does he talk about? That first line, which is so important. There is a cosmic element in nationality, which is its basic ingredient. He, from the most secular of ways, touching the land, returning to the land, says, wait a minute, no, this isn't just about land and politics. There's something powerful here. There's something that I can touch that's going to be this fountain of creativity. And he says Jewish life in the diaspora lacks this cosmic element of national identity. It's only sustained by the historic element. There are only so many times you can say Lashana Haba Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem and not get there. And there's something about Jerusalem that's so powerful. And of course, and with this I'm going to end to open up for more questions and comments. Of course, it leads to this amazing creativity. Look at these three poems. Look at the excitement of returning to the land. And look again how there's two different poets. Take the land and go in different directions. So the poetess Rachel, she's just known as Rachel, in 1926 says, I've not sung you, my country, not brought glory to your name with the great deeds of a hero, or the spoil the battle yields. My love of this land is not about how much blood is spilled, not about how far we have to fight, how hard we have to fight. But on the shores of the Jordan, I've planted a tree. She's part of the kibbutz movement. We're turning what was brown into green. We're making the land bloom again. We're bringing it alive. And my feet have made a pathway through your fields. Modest are the gifts I bring you. I know this mother, right? The powerful metaphors of mother, of father, of returning to the land. This is what indigeneity is all about. And again, I want to emphasize what I'm trying to talk about today is the identity that emerges, the creativity that emerges. I take our rights for granted. I'm not here to apologize. I'm not here to justify. I'm here to celebrate. And I'm here to invite all of us in your own indigenous traditions to say, wow, oh, we have the same kind of process. We have similar kind of metaphors. We have similar kinds of powers. And these are the most important powers of the world. Not the power of tanks, not the power of armies, not the power of politicians, but the power of creativity, the power of dreaming, the power of really making the world a better place. Modest I know the offerings of your daughter, only an outburst of song on a day when the light flares up. Only a silent tear for your poverty, and that's a poverty we're going to finish. And the national poet Natan Alterman writes the Song of the Homeland. On the mountains the sun already blazes, and in the valleys the dew still shines. We love you, homeland, with joy, with song, and with toil. Very similar, right? Wow. We've been stuck. We've been living in the ghettos of Europe. We've been in the Kasbahs in the Middle East. We've lost our home. We've lost our land. The love just of the sheer nature. And if we had more time, I'd show you amazing pictures of these people who wanted to come and walk the land and touch the land and celebrate the land. But look what he does. From the slopes of Lebanon to the Dead Sea, we'll crisscross you with plows. We'll cultivate and build you. We shall beautify you. Now, this might trigger warning. This might not work for everybody, but this is the 1930s, and this is what gets him excited. We will dress you in a gown of concrete and cement and lay for you a carpet of gardens. So, right, we're industrializing now. Again, in group therapy, we can talk about the pluses and minuses of this, but this is exciting. This is settlement. And this is how civilizations emerged. This is how all the great things of Western civilization emerged. We will lay for you a carpet of gardens on the soils of redeemed fields. The harvest will chime with bells. The desert wilderness we will cross. The swamps we will drain. Is draining swamps a positive, pro-nature, environmental thing? Or is it a conquistadores extractive thing? Let's talk about it. Let's debate it. Let's learn from the mistakes of the past. But let's not turn it into indictment. Let's not weaponize it. What we give is few glory and satisfaction. What has not yet been given, we shall give. In the hills our light shined. We will climb the mountain. We will leave yesterday behind as we return to our roots, right? But we're going to leave the bad yesterdays behind. Although the path to tomorrow remains long, even if the difficult path is treacherous, and even if some of us may fall, we will love you, our homeland, forever. We are yours in battle and in toil. Alterman, Rachel, Aleph Dalet Garden are creatures of the left. Love of land is not a right-wing concept, my friends. We cannot let it become so politicized. In a longer version of this lecture, and I'll share some of these texts with Wayne, you can read Reform rabbis. You can read left-wingers today, like Leah Shaktiel, a great peace activist, who says, when my secular Tel Avivi friends, but she's a religious peace activist, she says, when my secular Tel Avivi friends say, we have no ties to the land, because we've evolved beyond it, I say, well then, you know what? You really are colonizers, imperialists. You are here because you're a Jew. You are here because your ancestors were here. You are here because it's part of you. And they go, oh yeah, I guess so. And when they say, Ani Chiloni, I'm secular, I go to them, great. There's a hot new restaurant that just opened up in Tel Aviv. I can only get reservations for 7 o'clock on Friday night. And they go, I can't go then. I go, why not? They go, my mother will kill me. I go, why? They say, because I have to be there for Shabbat dinner. I say, you're the worst kind of secular, which is the best kind of secular. We've got to break out of our polarities, our all or nothings, our left and right. And to finish, because these are difficult times, and because also Natan and I want to honor every one of you who came from abroad to testify, to support us, to be with us during this difficult moment. We know that sometimes loving the land, holding the land, as you saw on October 7th, just living on the land can extract an unfathomable price. And what I learned on October 10th, 3 days after October 7th, when I was still stuck in Holocaust metaphors and still stuck in failure and still stuck in shame, that yes, the Israeli government failed on October 7th. Yes, the IDF temporarily failed on October 7th. But look at all the heroes who emerged, who saved Israel. The Israelis who saved Israel understood two fundamental things. One, they understood that Zionism is a methodology that teaches us not only to get back to ourselves, not get back to our creativity, but also to learn how to defend ourselves when necessary. And using this very powerful poem, Magash HaKesef, the Silver Platter, we learn that I never promised you a rose garden. It's not given to us on a silver platter. And sometimes the land is streaked with blood, but we don't define it by blood and soil. We define it by tradition. We define it by history. We define it by creativity. We define it by community. We define it, going back to the first word Natan used, by identity. Thank you very much.